Hello again, Steve here with a few words on what I see as the importance of mental diet. Now, we all know that, a physical diet or the food that we eat is important, right? I mean, the old saying, we are what we eat. Well, we could also say that whatever we eat, whatever we put into our body, right? There are thoughts that we tend to dwell on, the people we hang out with, the media we watch, the food we eat, the physical strain we put our body under, whether that's any eustress, a good helpful stress or a distress level. All of these are going to either help or hinder us, right? It's actually amazing when you eat in a certain way that is for a while that's different than what you used to eat. Usually in most cases that's an improved case, right, where you become aware. You say, okay, I've learned something now. I'm going to change what I eat. I'm going to eat a different way. I'm going to modify my lifestyle in that way. After a while, the old way seems rather odd. It seems to stand out. And especially if you hang out with people who are helpful and are not tempting you with that old food, and you start hanging out with those people, when you see what you used to eat and you hang out in that situation, it's just weird all of a sudden. It's kind of strange that way. I had a bit of an experience of this just yesterday. Actually, I was at the gym. I go to this gym, and they have all these TV screens, wall to wall, different TV screens, and they all have different stuff on them. And a couple of times I've actually asked the staff, "Can you please turn off, a TV show that's just endlessly a guy with a badge and a gun clubbing people?" I mean, I say, what's the point in that? Like, how is that helping anybody? There's no audio. There's nothing. It's just, I mean, and there's a dissonance when I ask people to do stuff like that, because they don't even understand. Like, what's wrong with that? It's out there. It's almost like the air. It's so ubiquitous, right? So anyways, yesterday I was watching this, and there was 3 screens in front of me. So one of the screens right in front of me was news, this 24-hour news stuff. And of course, the term fake news is out there a lot. So, and it's not new to me. I mean, the term is new. I used to just call it propaganda, but it's the new term now is fake news, or very fake news. And as somebody if you're aware enough, you'll know who said that. Anyway, just to give you an idea, because I've known this for a long time, being in the freedom movement. Of course, in the freedom movement, one becomes extremely aware. Being in the freedom movement is like being on is like becoming a thought vegan almost. All of a sudden, it's like anything that's not helpful, it gets thrown out. And and of course, just like being a vegan, there's variety, right? Because, or a vegetarian, or whatever a diet somebody takes on, it's nuancedly different than the next guy, because we all have our preferences and our ideas of what is best, our interpretation of what's best. But nevertheless, it's a bit like that. So I've been well aware for a long, long time. It was no surprise that it's a front. It's wall-to-wall propaganda for the most part. I mean, first of all, I used to do this experiment when there used to be such a thing as a paper newspaper. This was several years ago now. I'd pick up a newspaper, and about 95% of what's in there is government, right? It's all this Halifax man, police arrest this, such and such a politician says this, the mayor said that, such and such a city this, and it's all reference the state. It's just full of it, right? So right away, that's all fakery. So the premise upon which it's built is a fake. So therefore, it has to be fake to a great extent. But anyways, I'm reading this book, The China Study, and I've been a nutritional skeptic for a very long time, and I actually wrote a book on nutrition and health close to 20 years ago now. My first published book. Still available, but it's out of print if you look for it in used bookstores. So I've been a skeptic a long, long time about this, and I'm well aware of the government media collusion into the fakery of falsifying stuff. But anyways, this guy here, T. Colin Campbell, who's a fairly mainstream guy, but who was involved in the deep state of the nutritional industry and nutritional research for a very long time. I just want to read a couple things that he says here in this book that I'm reading. He says the entire system, he's saying the entire system, not just the odd character. No, the entire system. Government, science, medicine, industry, and media promote profits over health, technology over food, and confusion over clarity. That's the biggest thing. It's amazing. Most but not all of the confusion about nutrition is created legally. Doesn't mean legally is any good, does it? Fully disclosed ways, and is disseminated by unsuspecting, well-intentioned people, whether they're researchers, politicians, journalists, well-intentioned politicians. I don't know what you call them. Anyway, the most damaging aspect of the system is not the sensational, nor is it likely created, is not sensational, nor is it likely to create much of a stir upon its discovery. It is a silent enemy that few people see and understand. It's just amazing. And he goes on in different, even in the next chapter. My experience with the scientific community illustrates how the entire system generates confusing information, and why you haven't heard the message of this book before. And then in the following chapters, I will divide the system of problems into entities of science, government, industry, and medicine. But as you will come to see, there are instances where it's nearly impossible to distinguish science from industry, industry from science, and government from industry. You know, there used to be such a thing as church and state, and then people fought long and hard to have separation of church and state. Well, I would hope that we could eventually separate, government from the universe, if that could happen. But if we could get at least separate, if we could separate government from science, get rid of political science. Get rid of political science. I mean political science in terms of the real politicized science. Get rid of separation of church and economy. Separation of government and economy, rather, state and economy. Separation of government and man, right? And anyways, I could go well into this. For a little further on down, government. Okay. He was on several different boards, these sort of think tanks for nutrition, right? And he was on one that was this government-sponsored thing. It was supposed to advise the government on what they put out for the food guide. Essentially, I'm kind of paraphrasing here. And he was this underling who got in there kind of as a mistake, because he was a rabble-rouser and a skeptic. But he got in there, but there was all these entrenched lobbyists who ran the thing. Basically, it was the dairy lobby, the suspects, or the likely suspects, like the meat, dairy, and poultry, egg lobbies were there, and they were to come up with an idea of maybe suggesting more vegetables and more plant-based, more whole foods and whatnot. And they didn't come to an agreement really. At the end of this meeting, they had one major meeting a year. Sure enough, a few weeks later, he's at some hotel, he turns on the TV, and there's the guy who runs this committee, the chairman of this committee or whatever it is, pronouncing what their decision was. And of course, it was just to support the government industrial complex, right? Food complex. It was just absolutely staggering. He talked about how he was with this other organization that started to put out more truthful, and what I mean by truthful is science-based, real science-based, long-term, like the China study, the largest nutritional study in history of humanity. It's got a few things to say about how things are, right? But it interferes with people's profit motives. He used the term in here, he asked the question, you ever heard of the golden rule? The golden rule, right? We often think of the golden rule as something other than what he was talking about. He says what it is he who has the gold gets to make the rules. And that's what it comes down to so much, especially when there's corruption and no philosophy in there. So anyways, fake news. So there was this big attack that was going on the report that they wanted to put out. So he was surprised that government interference was particularly harsh. National and state attorney general offices questioned the AICR status and its fundraising procedures. This was the organization that he worked with, which was a quasi-independent organization that was talking about plant-based food. The U.S. Postal Office joined in the fray. Think of how the IRS went after conservative groups before the last election, and probably what got Obama elected. Think of that. Think of how under Clinton and Obama, they were turning the FBI into the Stasi, basically, right? This is how dangerous the collusion that bad people who get a hold of the state, and interests, like their profit motive interests, their gold, when they get a hold of the state, extremely dangerous. And that's why it was so important to have separation of church and state going way back, because otherwise people were just, there was too many people getting killed. Anybody, whoever got control of the guns could take over the other guys, and that's what's happening. So the U.S. Postal Service, they sent the U.S. Postal Service after these guys into the fray, questioning whether the AICR could use the mail to spread junk information. That's what they actually said. That's amazing to me. And this stuff, we hear about this stuff on the news, this 24-hour news channel. They're talking about this and talking about this and talking about this. Where do they get the information? This guy's talking about how fucked up and how messed up the information source is, right? Okay, here's something now, going on further on down the road, there was, he was asked to go to speak at a cancer convention. And he was part of this AICR committee, which was doing research into nutrition and its effect on cancer. And because he's found out that, cancer is basically a nutrition disease, and it's almost completely solvable. This idea of let's find a cure, find a cure. Fake news. Basically, if you read this, it's astounding, really. So anyways, he's talking about how he was at this conference. This is amazing, right? And there was this question and answer period after. And somebody in there, and he didn't let the people know, just to not to advertise his position and put himself in a conflict of interest or whatever. But he didn't let people know that he was part of the AICR, but he mentioned the AICR when he was there, when he was doing the lecture. Somebody asked at the end, something like this. I was asked the question, do you know that the AICR is an organization of quacks? So this is one of these terms like conspiracy theorists, right? It's an ad hominem that's thrown at people when there's no evidence. Otherwise, it's attack the messenger rather than look at the message. No, I said, I don't. I'm afraid I don't know. I'm afraid I didn't do such a good job of hiding my skepticism of her comment, because she felt obliged to explain. In quote, that organization has been run by a group of quacks and discredited doctors. Some of them have served time in prison, she said. Prison time? This was new to me. Again, without revealing my association with the AICR, I asked, how do you know that? She said, I saw it in a memo that had been circulated at the local American Cancer Society offices around the country. Before leaving, I arranged for her to send me a copy of this memo that she was referring to, and in a day she did. The memo had been sent from the office of the National President of the American Cancer Society, who also was the senior executive of the prestigious Rockwell Park Memorial Institute for Cancer Research in Buffalo. The memo alleged that the scientific chair of the organization, without naming me, was heading up a group of 8 or 9 discredited physicians, several of whom had spent time in prison. It was a total fabrication. I didn't even recognize the names of the discredited physicians, and had no idea how something so vicious could have gotten started. After snooping around a bit more, I discovered the person in the American Cancer Society's office in Buffalo who was responsible for the memo. I phoned him. Not surprisingly, he was evasive and only said he had gotten the information from an unnamed reporter, an unnamed source, right? It was impossible to trace the source. Oh, so surprising. Why should we be surprised? So anyways, here I am pedaling away on this elliptical and watching this stuff. And it's like all of a sudden watching some weird food that I used to eat. It's crazy. The next TV was basically the gladiators. I can only describe it as the gladiators. There was just nonstop people pounding each other's faces in. I believe it's called MMA or something like mixed martial arts. And there was these two women who had, one of them had a bloodied face, and they're just pounding each other. And there's a whole crowd of people. I'm thinking, how is this a lot different? Sure, in the gladiator, somebody gets eaten by a lion. Okay, so we are a little bit more civilized. We no longer just allow people to get eaten. But of all the things that people can do, why would they go watch a couple of women beat the fucking shit out of each other? Like it's just bizarre to me. Once again, it's this almost like a time warp. I'm sitting there like, who watches this? Why would they decide to put that on? It's bizarre to me. The next one was staggering to me. What was it called? Let me just have a look here. It was called, the show was called, I never heard of it before. Maybe somebody has. It was called Spike TV Lip Sync Battle. And I guess the title tells you what it is. But what it was a bunch of women twerking their pussies right on the screen. I mean, they had hot pants on, but it was just astounding to me. And I was thinking, because of the uproar of all this, Trump had apparently said that rich people who had lots of money, women would throw themselves at him and you could grab their pussy. Didn't say he grabbed them, he said you could. And people just went berserk. And people like Hillary Clinton went berserk, of course, and her husband was pretty much settled hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars out of court out of rape allegations and is fairly credible evidence that he's a pedophile, etc. But she pontificates as to how this is such a disastrous thing to do. And yet, I'm thinking, I'm watching this thing, and where's the outcry? Where is the outcry of these women belittling themselves, putting themselves out there for everybody to watch? And of course, if anybody dares say anything about the pussy, or make comments about them, or what they might want to do with the pussy, especially if they're on the left, it'd be fine. It'd be perfectly fine, probably. But if they're on the right, they would be crucified in the public by these fake news hucksters, right? Because they're running a narrative. So but all this though, I ramble about it, of course, is not intended to be a critique of each individual TV event. It's just the bizarreness of having extricated myself from that and then seeing it again is just weird. Like people are just, I don't know. Anyway, so how does this apply to the Inner Genie Project? Well, the Inner Genie Project is a lot to do with cleansing. Anybody who's ever gone through a dietary cleanse of eating very whole foods for a while, you have a feel for something, and you can feel that changes take place. And it's actually a challenge. It's a challenge to wean ourselves off of something. So along the lines of the Inner Genie Project, it is important, if we are to get in touch with ourselves, to begin to wean ourselves off of stuff that is not helpful. In fact, the stuff that is harmful and rather toxic, which includes toxic foods, toxic environments, toxic programming, toxic people, toxic habits. And it all takes effort, right? Because it's like if we want to get somewhere, if we want to achieve something, it's like a narrow path. And there's all kinds of distractions, just like that whole wall of televisions with all kinds of stuff that it's nothing to do with me. And that's a challenge. So it's important to become aware of that there's all kinds of stuff. We know it anyway. But then work on ourselves in ways that we can get the sense of value that's strong enough for why it is that we want to go in this direction. And once that's strong enough, then we begin to involve ourselves in behaviors and with people and with situations and food and exercise and mental food that is helpful for that path. And everything else begins to walk away. Everything else looks like poison after a while. And that's when we've gotten onto the path. And the challenge is just to stay on it. Genie project. Something you might want to consider. Steve, you're getting great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.